my name is Michelle De Silva. I'm the online and social media manager at Now Magazine. I'm also a freelance journalist. I cover a lot of stories that have to do with community and culture, with a special interest in millennials, race and gender equity, mental health, and DIY spaces. Before we begin, I'm going to just introduce the people that we have up here on our panel. Starting from the far left, we have Cindy Lee, better known as Ciel. Cindy is an established DJ and promoter in Toronto. She started work in progress to highlight underground electronic music produced by women. Next to Cindy, we have Bambii, when she's not performing, Bambii, who is a Toronto DJ, who started the monthly Jerk Party, which celebrates the Black musical diaspora. Then we've got Mykki Blanco. Mykki is a queer performance artist, rapper, poet, and activist based out of Lisbon now. In 2017, Mykki hosted the documentary Out of This World, which helped tell the story of South Africa's genderqueer community. Finally, we've got Winnie Luk. Winnie is the managing director of Rainbow Railroad. When Winnie isn't doing advocacy work, she moonlights as a DJ in Toronto. So, getting started, this panel was billed as progressive nightlife for global change. What does progressive nightlife mean to you guys? And maybe can you describe an experience that you've had where you feel like you've been in a progressive nightlife situation?
Off the bat.
Mykki, jump in.
Yeah, I think, well, I also wanted to say that if everyone has, questions or things that are bubbling in your brains, take little notes, because usually it's the real dialogue kind of starts to come from the audience in these situations. So to answer your question super directly but indirectly, I think the fact that even this sentence, nightlife as a catalyst for global change, the fact that that's a sentence that is being uttered and we talk about, and that this panel is happening. We were having a little mini discussion before, and it speaks to the sign of the times that people want to be engaged and have these conversations, because I remember, I'm sure all of you remember when nobody was having these conversations, and the acceleration point in which, things in our world, in our multiple societies, have radically shifted so many things politically, mainstream dialogues about sexuality. And I think the first really inclusive, crazy party that I felt like, and this is going to age me, I'm only 32, but the first party that I really was like, okay, this feels like everything all at once, was probably the very early days of Venus X's Ghetto Gothic Party in New York City.
And what was the vibe like there? What made it feel inclusive?
It was just it was one of the first parties I ever went to where you had D-boys and people from Harlem and East New York coming out along with the trans community, and this is before this kind of more recent trans visibility in New York City. So it's you had a lot of members of the trans community. It was just everybody, it was everybody all at once hanging out. And I had not experienced so much of that in that same way.
That's amazing. Bambii, it looked like you want to maybe jump in earlier.
I was just looking at him.
Okay.
But for me, the first progressive nightlife space that I ever was in was Yes, Yes, Y'all. I don't know, everyone's probably familiar with Yes, Yes, Y'all. And that was kind of the first place where I realized my own queerness, and also kind of saw a community represented that felt so comfortable. And so it wasn't just a turn up for me. It actually was an awakening of self, and just I just felt so affirmed. So I think spaces that challenge people are progressive, and I think nightlife can do that.
We hear a lot about safe spaces now, and that word safe space is being thrown around a lot. But sometimes it's not just about having a safe space, but actually feeling welcome in a space. Cindy, I see you nodding your head. Do you want to kind of what's that differentiation for you?
Well, first of all, I don't call it a safe space. I call it a safer space, because there's no space that's truly safe. All we can do is try our best to make more people feel included and welcome. We talk a lot about inclusiveness, which goes hand in hand with what you say about feeling welcome. And there are parties, now I kind of inhabit in a slightly different world of sort of Toronto techno, which is less inclusive than I would say Yes Yes Y'all. The parties that like I went to a Yes Yes Y'all party in 2012, maybe long time ago, and it was unlike any party I've ever gone to that even since then in Toronto. If I go to techno parties, it's very white, very male. It's kind of, I have my work cut out for me, and I've seen a lot of people of color abandon techno in Toronto, not because they don't like techno, but because they don't feel welcome in those spaces. And that is really something we have to talk about, where it's like, I've done parties where because sometimes I do I have work in progress, but I also collaborate with white men, and I do parties as It's Not You, It's Me, which I believe in strongly in integration. That's always my goal with work in progress, is getting more women booked in lineups with men and not just keeping us sort of in our own ghettoized like section of like the little kids table at Thanksgiving dinner. And I feel like I really believe that you have to work with men, you have to work with the status quo, the establishment, if you want these ideas to spread. And in a lot of those spaces, I have to really watch how much of my own values I have to compromise in order to seem more palatable, more easy to work with. And sometimes what ends up happening is that I'll book an artist that I really respect, and then my core audience don't feel welcome and they leave. And that's a challenge that I'm constantly having to navigate, is how much to do to advance my what's the word? What's that word I'm looking for? Like, advance my values without compromising them, because I have to work with certain people who there is a little bit more like work involved.
For sure, for sure. Mykki, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that like we, as in like us, and also the people in this room and the people that think about these things, I do think that like we kind of, I don't want to say a pat on the back, but I feel like we do need to acknowledge that like it's a good thing that as a community we actually want to have these conversations, because most people, you know what I mean, most people, and especially in nightlife situations, it's like it's all about money, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's all about money, and it's all about actually sticking to that status quo. So it's like, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would go to these clubs, but like, you know, it's like you have these clubs where like you have to have the shoes and the pants and that kind of shit. They could give a shit about inclusivity, you know what I mean? They want to make their bill at the bar and let it be done. A majority of the LGBT community and the mainstream LGBT community in North America, because I'm not specifically sure about Toronto, but it's predominantly, these clubs usually always segregate people of color to like one night at the club and make no mistake about having a dress code that is blatantly racist to like discourage people of color from coming to like the club, you know?
So what's the solution then? Like, there's, you know, these mainstream clubs, venues, and then there's like maybe DIY spaces or just underground spaces that people are performing in. Do you just kind of like say to hell with like the mainstream venues and, you know, forget about them? Winnie.
Just wanted to comment about I agree 100% with what you said, Cindy, about the electronic music scene being very white and very male-dominated. There was a time, and this might date myself, I don't know if anyone recalls the group ADD. They produced amazing electro clubs or electro parties, and I felt that they were one of the first. And I also feel when art and culture can, various mediums of arts and culture can cross with music and club and nightlife, it makes a difference. And ADD and the parties that they threw that had themes and welcome queerdos and people, you know, being who they were, dressing whatever way they wanted. There was a heavy female presence in it as well. And then also looking back to one of the very first queer parties I ever attended was at Buddies and Bad Times Theater. There's Glad Day Bookshop now that has also changed in structure to include a bar, club, restaurant, as well as being the longest and oldest LGBT bookstore in the world, actually. So there are are these spaces that are coming up, old and I think new, that can be progressive, are welcoming, are making an attempt to become safer spaces. And I think it is important to also recognize the people who did do that or attempted to do that, 10, 15, 20 years ago, which is kind of dating myself.
Yeah, but I've heard during that time in the 2000s, the dance music scene here was a lot more integrated with the queer community.
It was.
More people of color, more women, but it just seems like we've regressed as...
It's an interesting shift, because when I was younger, I felt, at some points actually, at these various parties, like the promise parties, the 80 parties, I actually almost felt more welcome, and I met more people, and even lovers, and people, like it wasn't as segmented or segregated, but I do definitely agree there has been some type of regression in the electronic music scene in Toronto.
What do you think's causing that?
It's hard to say. I question, and I ask that question.
I think it really goes down to the dichotomy of, like, we talk about this a lot in social media, of like choosing to live within your bubble or to go beyond. I think people have a right to feel safe and welcome, and if they want to abandon scenes that do not make them feel welcome, they're absolutely within their right to do so. But that is what I see has happened specifically in techno in Toronto, where it's very male-dominated, and people who once used to go to those parties, I talk to them now, and they're like, yeah, we go to Yes, Yes, Yell parties. We don't go to those parties anymore. And that's very, very telling to me what techno, it's almost like very conservative in
Toronto in
comparison.
general. Toronto
Yeah.
in general is very conservative. And I mean, it doesn't help that venues are closing left, right, and center.
Of course,
We barely have an after hours scene anymore. And the one, I mean, Comfort Zone, it's in its own little league, but like Circa or System Soundbar or Boa, Sonic, whereas
There's after hours.
There are, okay, good.
I throw
Let me
after
know.
hours.
I am a little older now, but
I think it's also like, I think two things. I think, first of all, you have to get, and this isn't a very nice word, but you have to get these squares to realize that, like, that this is like the new wave. Yeah. And also I think it's generationally, because I was born in 1986, and it feels like everybody around my age, like, is either like really hard, maybe it's just like an age thing. I feel like everyone who's like around like 30 or so or whatever are kind of deciding, they're like, oh, am I gonna like be a creative, or am I gonna like do this path, or am I just gonna co-opt it all? So like I go out sometimes in spaces, in any all kinds of spaces, and I'm like, damn, there are way more yuppies than I feel like there used to be. But it's like, but it's also it's just weird, because it's like, I don't know what makes people turn away from something that used to be fun and interesting and then go the other way and start hanging out in sports bars. I've never understood that, but it happens, I don't get it.
I think it's hard in Toronto. So the permitting and the licensing, all of that, I think those are barriers that, unfortunately, Toronto bylaws, it's hard for the music scene or people to want to invest. Real estate is ridiculously expensive, and investing in these spaces, because I do know like friends who've tried, they invest their blood, sweat, and tears into it, and then within half a year, these spaces are closing. So it's a challenging market that we have in Toronto.
Bambii, I want you to jump into the conversation here. You started the jerk parties, like Yes, Yes, Yell. They're truly diverse on the dance floor, and the lineup, the music, everything. How have you kind of been able to, usher in that vibe at your parties and kind of ensure that?
Yeah, I think that being self-determined is kind of underestimated. So I think that, like, I agree with you in terms of, like, needing to work with the 1%, whatever the fuck it, you know what I mean? But I also think that, like, often I get asked in interviews, like, how do you, like, what barriers do you face? Or, like, how have you handled being marginalized? And like, I find those questions really condescending because actually, I feel like my multiple communities have me. And I feel like the reason I am successful, the reason my events are successful is because I am a woman of color. I am a queer woman. I am Caribbean. And like, when I throw events, my community comes through for me. So I actually don't feel that marginalized, actually. And I think that people, like 1,000 people come to my events, 1,000 POC come out for me. So I am, that kind of narrative around like people of color constantly is like harmful, I think. And I think that, I think the reason why anything I have ever done has been successful is because I come from those communities. I have sincere ties to those people. And like, that's what makes it diverse. That's what makes it poppin'. That's what makes it cool. So I don't know. For me, it's like, this is like, it's my experience. It's like my personal narrative. So I don't know what the question was. What was the question?
No, that's awesome. Mykki, you've also really experienced, like, you and your community being like your fans, the people that come out to your shows, they're obviously super supportive of every part of who you are and all that you do. Can you explain a little bit about that dynamic and how you've kind of fostered that dynamic with your fans?
Well, like, I can make it, and I can make it short too. A lot of people always assume that like my predominant like demographic is like LGBT people, and it is, but actually, the number one person that comes to my show is a heterosexual woman.
It's true.
And
That's true.
and oftentimes these women, queer women, but honestly, majority heterosexual women will say to me like, besides like, just enjoying you as an artist, I love coming to your shows because I know I can wear whatever I want. Yeah. I know that we can be together, and I'm not. It's not going to be this like sexual battlefield where I can't even go to the bathroom without like someone like groping or making it past at me. You know what I mean? And I had not realized that was a big deal. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't a part of my lived experience in that way. So it was like I was like, wow, like. This because truthfully, growing up, honestly, like when you have like a high school LGBT club, the word safe space I connote with like so much corny stuff from like high school. But then when you realize when you're on a tour and you're going to like Salt Lake City, all these places where like there's honestly not that much cool stuff going on, but people still live there and are cool and have their cool lives in these like, places, you realize that, oh shit, like this idea of a safe space is way bigger than just like some like, little word that I associated in high school. It's like, it actually is a place where people feel free, and that departure of freedom is what makes their life better that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. Definitely.
Kind of playing on that safe spaces thing, and also Cindy, you spoke a little bit about like us being in our progressive bubbles. Do you guys feel like, I guess Cindy, you said like you feel like the silos are maybe growing higher, and that there's kind of greater divide between good and evil, I guess, on the dance floor. But
sometimes,
yeah, I guess But do the rest of you agree? Do you feel like...
I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question. Yeah. Sometimes it does feel like it's getting more divisive. Other times it feels like people are learning, people are growing. And if you're just kind of on the outside looking in, it does seem like it's getting better. More women, more queer people, more people of color are getting booked on lineups. Lineups are getting more diverse. You still have some people kind of in the corner holding on to their all-male white lineups for dear life. But mostly, for the most part, people are, kind of adapting because they know that if they don't, then they're going to get something bad will happen. I don't know. They feel bad. But the thing is, nowadays, I also have to watch out for, like, dudes that are capitalizing on this conversation because they want to... Yes. Because now it's a money-making thing, or entities that were never doing the work before 3 years ago or 5 years ago, who all of a sudden are like, I'm progressive, and I care about these things. And then you find out later behind the scenes that they paid their female artists a third of what they paid their male artists, and that kind of thing. And, like... you do have to watch out for snakes like that. Men who are, who think that it's not about being correct, it's about being politically correct, which is very different, One is, I think, a genuine desire to want to do well and, do the right thing. And another is it's superficial and playing the game and that kind of thing. It drives me crazy. I know so many men like that, especially in Toronto techno, that do that. And it's really hard to navigate being able to tell who is real and who is not. And sometimes they don't even realize it. Sometimes they're just like, oh, well, I paid her less because he has 2 records out and she only has 1. Or I did this because he has 100 more likes on Facebook than she does. And it's like, you're just making up arbitrary reasons for why, when ultimately the female artist had more people showing up for her than the male artists. And you can't measure that from going on Discogs or RA or whatever.
You just spoke so much fucking truth, and like, and it actually that shit also really drives me crazy because, when I do this every year, when all the summer festival bookings like start coming out, like I will sit and I'll be like, okay, Pitch Fest, Lollapalooza, this, that, Governor's Island, blah blah blah, and I'll look, and I'll be like, goddamn, like it's literally all straight. And mostly, literally, maybe all men, maybe they sprinkled one woman in there. When I first started rapping, people would always give me these questions like, oh, why do you think hip hop is so homophobic? And I used to answer it immediately like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Then after a while and after I matured some, I was like, wait a minute, this question is fucking racist. Because hip hop is actually not any less or more homophobic than just the music industry in general. And so it's like when you pinpoint hip hop, that's just actually being racist. But it's like this idea of like I call them gatekeepers, where it's the same thing that happened with a lot of these like upheavals in our society. A lot of the people that still have these booking jobs, that still have these kind of like gatekeeping, like I decide who goes on, are straight white men. My booking agent is a straight white man. The one before him was a straight white man. The one before him was a straight white man. So it's like, and I will say this: it becomes this thing where I'm not trying to poo-poo anyone, but I'm also not going to be like, oh, we need to have a conversation where we like make straight white men the enemy. It's not that. It's just that when you have straight white men creating the status quo, and then like that status quo is not shifting while the rest of society is, it starts to make people look really silly.
So let's be real here. Like partying is an economy, like everything else, right? Can equity and capitalism really like coexist?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you wanna...
I think with everything there's a balance. I think people need to be less greedy, actually, and I think people need to hoard resources less. And I think there's a way for, I don't like to use the word entrepreneur because it's corny, but there's a way to be like for me, I'm like self-determined. I work as a DJ and a promoter, whatever you want to say. And I feel like I've been able to have a good quality of life. I've been able to have mobility, have privileges, and also keep my parties accessible to people who come from various socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think it's possible. I think that, like Mykki said, a majority of nightlife is about hoarding resources. It's like a money grab. It's about making as much money as possible off as many bodies in one space. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's possible. Definitely.
Winnie, working in advocacy, working in a nonprofit area, what's your opinion on this, like in terms of capitalism and equity?
I think it is possible as well. I've been working in nonprofit and arts for 17 years, and without the support of certain organizations and or businesses and corporations, it's a little bit more difficult. And so there are really good intentions and work and actions being done, helping organizations like Rainbow Railroad. I used to work for Inside Out. We presented the Toronto LGBT and Ottawa LGBT Film Festival, and through events throughout the festivals and throughout the year. And then we did, again, have to partner with sponsors that provided us with product, help us outreach and market. And so there are people doing good work out there. So I think there is, and capitalism is not going to disappear anytime soon. So I think we have to find a way to work with it. Yeah.
I guess this is kind of an example. Like maybe you can talk a little bit about
very much an example.
how is this all connected to Rainbow Railroad? What does Nightlife and Rainbow Railroad have to do with one another?
First of all, I want to say thank you very much to Absolut for having Rainbow Railroad and inviting us to join and making us a beneficiary of this. So important. And the fact that there is a nightlife, a queer nightlife in Toronto, in certain parts of the States, in certain parts of the world, the fact that I could be sitting up here, I could identify as, a queer woman, that I have a business card, that I feel safe giving people out. That is a privilege, and it's important to be very aware that this is not possible everywhere around the world. There are over 70 countries that still criminalize same-sex intimacies, 8 of them also with the death penalty. So when you think about and just being very aware of where we are in location and geography and the politics that we are navigating right now, and just recognizing the fact that this panel is happening, the party this evening is happening, and that an organization like Rainbow Railroad is the beneficiary. We're incredibly lucky because in certain places like Uganda or in Jamaica, any type of celebration, they have to be done in secrecy. If the brave people are actually doing it, a lot of people are not able to be themselves, whether it's their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And we help every day, and we get requests, hundreds and hundreds of requests. Last year we got over 1,000 requests, and we were able to help over 200 people, bring them to safety around the world. There's a bit of a misconception that a lot of them we bring to North America. That's not actually true. It's other parts of the world as well, Western Europe being one of them. And so the nightlife, and the connection, and not just nightlife, I would say, in a lot of ways and capacities, is just, again, the awareness that we are very lucky and that people around the world don't get to do this and speak up and talk and take action.
Awesome. So the other half of this conversation, there's the progressive nightlife part and then global change. So I want to just talk a little bit about kind of moving beyond the community of just a single event on any given night. But I'm wondering what are some examples or maybe some anecdotes you guys might have where parties have led to kind of greater social change, maybe beyond nightlife.
I don't know if. Wow. Okay. Sorry. I don't know if parties actually result in global change. I think parties reflect change that is happening all around us in the world that we live in, because it is a part of it's a part of our daily lives, or not weekly lives, maybe if you party every day. But it's not, I think that there is this misconception that for people like us, we think that the work is throwing these parties and we're done. That's it. We go home and do the same shit that we always do. And it's not really. I feel like for a lot of queer people, for people of color, our very identity is politicized. And as such, everything that we do is politicized. That's sort of how I was, I've been doing this sort of female-centered work since I was 18 years old, running a radio show where I only played music produced by women. It's been a lifelong project for me because it's something that, I care about. I don't know if that necessarily, has a monumental change, but just like nightlife is an industry, just like working here, being a bartender, hospitality, being a doctor, being the medical, these are career fields for people. It should, if it's not okay for women to be paid less than men in an office, it should definitely not be okay for women to be paid less than men on a bill. And, you know, if you want your office to be like equal, then we should expect the exact same things from, because this is an industry of people who work, who are artists and deserve to be compensated for their times. And, you know, we owe it to them to do what we do.
For sure.
I was just last year in South Africa, and my friends, the artist Faka, they started a party called Cunty Power, and that's
a great name.
And yeah, it's a good name. And it was like when I was there, you know what I mean? Like I think almost 300 people like showed up, and in Joburg, that's like the only queer party, because like they have gay parties, but you can't be like, they have gay parties, but you can't be like trans, and you can't be like feminine. You can't dress however you want. You have to like, you know, be this like macho gay dude at these gay parties. So it's like so many people were telling me, they were like, no, like this is like the fact that this exists, you know what I mean? This place where we can be ourselves, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't before. And it was interesting because there were some older people there. When I say older, much older, like, yeah, well, no offense to anyone in their 40s, but like, but the people that were just like, they were like, oh, this queer thing is like a fashion trend. Like literally like saying that like, you know, the queer identity was like this like fashion trend. Like the kids, like as in like wearing black lipstick and like, you know, like Tumblr aesthetics or whatever, where like it was like that was queer, what queer was. So there was kind of a bit of a disconnect. But man, I've seen like, I mean, there are so many parties that have come and gone, and each one has been so important, I think, because it's like people really, really need to feel connected to other people and to a moment, and that gives you agency. I mean, I remember when everyone, and because of social media now, we all can also be a part of that and see that and then want to be a part of that. You know what I mean? It's like you had the endless parties in London that were like the everything for a minute, Nafi parties in Mexico City, Heron Sauna in Berlin, Caliente in Paris. Like all these parties like come, and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, this is what everyone's on now. And like something about that just makes you feel good and you can connect.
So I think when we're talking about all these ideas, they often exist in, I don't want to, like elite communities or woke communities. And I think that parties give people a chance to be in proximity with bodies and people that are unlike themselves. And I think that's really important, because I think that exposure, you know, some people might think it's superficial or it's very transient, but that exposure can really disrupt someone and cause them to ask many different questions about themselves and what they believe and whatever constructs that they've swallowed, you know, their whole lives. So I think that, I don't know about global change because it's such a lofty idea, but I just think on an individual level, just being in spaces that are not homogenous are good for you. I don't think it, like if we look at like small white towns, that's not good for you. Let's like stay there. That's why everybody leaves. They're not good for you. So yeah, I think parties, you know, disperse ideas in a more equitable way, because I'm not interested in like 30 woke people patting themselves on the back for being woke. Like it's like, you know what I mean? Because it's oftentimes the exposure. Like what we know has come from some sort of privilege or some sort of luck. The people who like don't know the language or don't know the terms or don't have these ideas probably didn't go to post-secondary, probably don't have like a mentor or a friend or blah, blah, blah. Like it's very circumstantial when people don't know things and when they're like enacting oppression, you know? So go ahead.
I also have seen some, I mean, obviously everyone's seen some crazy shit happen, but literally politically, like people really now feel an agency, and sometimes it's quite violent, you know, but I've seen people, you know, people coming in to a party, someone has on an afro wig, you know, ripping that shit off. You know, I was in Seattle. Oh my God, I was in Seattle, and this boy comes in with like this really stereotypical like South Asian white guy comes in with this like South Asian like hat, like farming hat, and like my friend, I couldn't believe it. She almost punched him. She was like fighting. It was a black girl fighting him over this hat, and I was just like, kind of like, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know, how can I say this? I feel like I felt awkward because people now are so kind of like charged in this way to like correct all of these wrongs, and I think that's really necessary. I don't know if I'm one of those people, but like I do think it's really necessary, but I also think it can be really awkward because I went to this party after Afropunk in Atlanta where white people weren't allowed. And I thought, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna be very honest, I know why they did that and I know what they were doing, I got it, but I wasn't like, I'm just not that kind of, that wasn't for me.
Right.
Like that to me was like, oh, like I know you guys are doing this, but like, oh, this is also kind of like should we really be doing this way?
Yeah, it's weird.
But like,
also in terms of like who's white passing and how people identify,
Exactly.
that's dangerous. Like,
Right.
there's some people be sneaking up. They're like, I'm mixed. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? You don't know.
but the fact that these really polarized things are happening is, I think, important because all of a sudden you're like, oh, like, you know, it's like when you go, it's like as a queer person, when you go to a club or something that you thought was cool, and all of a sudden your female friends can't get in, or your trans friend can't get in, and you're like, wait a minute, like, y'all are on some stuff that I really did not know you were on. If, like, these women I'm with can't come in this building, you know, it's like...
I don't know who that helps. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how helpful that is. Not that I'm trying to, like, cape for people who are dumbasses, but also, it's like... You know, I just think it becomes elitist. It becomes, like, very pretentious if we, like, hoard these ideas and we, like, I'm not into, like, call-out culture too much.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Because I think that we're, you know, like, when I see a bunch of, like, white feminists, like, jumping on people for not saying the exact right thing, I'm like, but that's, like, a privilege that you have to even know that.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So I think we need to be careful. And, yeah, these ideas are privileges, for sure.
On the same kind of point, though, like, you know, a lot of kind of DIY or I don't know, well, I'll just say progressive nightlife spaces, they've kind of been at the forefront of some social changes like all gender washrooms in those spaces, or what else do I have down here?
Let New York dance.
Yeah. Or having anti-harassment.
Did they reverse it?
They did repeal it, yeah.
When?
It was successful. It was a few months ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like this woman spearheaded that along with other crews, and they repealed the cabaret law, which is, if you're not familiar, a pretty racist law that's like enacted during the 1920s, I want to say, and it was a way to prevent black people from gathering and dancing in jazz clubs, which they never repealed until now, and police were using it to arbitrarily sort of stop parties from happening because it's literally a law that says you can't dance in nightclubs.
Stating anti-harassment policies at the door or on the event site. Can you, any other examples or things that you've seen?
Examples of, what was it?
Just examples where progressive nightlife has really kind of stepped up and made those things important in those spaces, and maybe in some ways like enacted some sort of consciousness raising to the people who attend, and like you said before, like being like, oh, I didn't know that this was an important thing, and I should be more aware. You know?
Yeah, I think honestly, I feel like for me, and I feel like for a lot of people, like social media has kind of equalized everyone's platform. So I think that, you know, obviously it can be a lot of bullshit, but, you know, in its most ideal context, people have been able to use social media to kind of like communicate their values, communicate important ideas that cross over into real life spaces. So for me, like I think when I started DJing, just like kind of constantly talking about what I was about, the kind of spaces I was trying to create, and the kind of people I was trying to prioritize, crossed over into the space I made in real life. So certain people just knew not to come. You know what I mean? Like you just knew that like this is not, if you're like uncomfortable with trans people, or you don't like black people, or you don't like to dance, or you're boring as hell, just don't come. This is not for you. So I think that and like social media is actually like important for that, and I think that's it.
The one big equalizer, everybody wants to be cool. And because everybody wants to be cool, if you come into these spaces and you're not, you know what I mean? It's just not gonna fly. It's like, I mean, it's interesting how certain things become trendy, but then they actually have real, you know, intrinsic value to a society. And it's like, if being like PC, because I remember, I mean, I was like way younger, but I remember when like, I don't want to say names, but like these media companies, and I just remember a time when like being PC was like not cool. There was like 1999, 2000, 2001, like where like, you know, Vice would say the most shocking thing, and like it was like really shock. Everything was shock and fucking let's do cocaine off people's dicks, and you know, and like this is not my this is published advice. This isn't my life. This was like photographs. This is photographs. This is photographs of the late Dashno. But there was just a time when like that was like so cool, you know? And it was really toxic. And it was really, really toxic. Yeah. And like if now it's on trend, if social justice is on trend, if like being conscious, if being aware, if not touching a woman's body just because she's wearing an outfit that makes her feel good, if all of these things are like now, you know, things that like are on trend, then if you started out like an asshole and you want to be trendy and that's how you're trendy now, that's the good. First, that's good.
I think in addition to whether it's a trend or not, to put these ideas into action. And I think one of them being partnering with groups like Rainbow Railroad, or when people have partnered with Inside Out and donating actual funds and are volunteering their time and actually, again, putting all these theories and concepts into action, helping people. You know, the fact that Absolut is donating the money at the door today, it will actually be meaningful and impactful for an organization like us. $10,000 actually saves a life. And, you know, a plane ticket, resources for travel, pre-travel, post-travel. So again, if you can go even beyond the discussions, beyond this panel, it matters, and taking that action and putting that money in that box, all of that. If you do partner with organizations that do the on-ground work, whether it's in Toronto, in Canada, or internationally, that makes a difference.
I just want to add that I don't think it's an accident that the global change or progressive nightlife has come from underground culture and alternative DIY culture. I think there is a precedent for the status quo establishment forces stealing ideas from queer artists, people of color, and things like that. And so in that way, of course, we are the people that are spearheading all of this. And as it spreads to more, you know, mainstream places, it will get diluted and it will get watered down or sort of executed in weird ways, like that Pepsi commercial with Kendall Jenner. Like, it's just, this will keep happening, and I think it's the way the world kind of works.
Definitely. Yeah. Conversations I've been having around race and gender like 3 years ago. Yeah. That like people just stumble upon right now.
Yeah.
Like,
they're slow.
Yeah, they're late.
Let's talk a little bit about brand involvement. Obviously, like Absolut is sponsoring this event as well as tonight's party, but it's more so for Rainbow Railroad's benefit, of course. But there's a lot of cases where brands jump on movements, parties, things like that. And you know, what are some of the kind of ethical ramifications of that?
You said it so good last night when we were talking. You said, what did I say last night? You said, don't documentary. You said it really good, like, what is it? Come on. You said something really good about, like, a corporation operating in all aspects.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just, last night, we actually I had a conversation briefly about this, and, like, I think that if a corporation from top to bottom, like, is operating morally, ethically, you know, within whatever they're trying to promote or co-opt, is, you know, as some people, I don't think that's a bad thing, because that's the nature of what a corporation does. As long as it from top to bottom is ethical, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You know, it's sad when you like find out that, like, a corporation has been branding themselves for like the last year or so as this super social justice or socially conscious company, and then all of a sudden all these sexual harassment lawsuits come up, or people kind of pick and choose. Like all of a sudden we're really environmentally friendly, but then it's like we do advertising that like has no people of color ever, and like our products are always catered. You know what I mean? So it's like the discrepancies I think like kind of suck. But I think if it's ethical from top to bottom, it's a good thing.
But that's very rare. I don't know if I know of any. Like when you think about Red Bull or, for example, the recent controversy with a radio station in London called Radar Radio, which positioned itself especially as a purveyor of grime, which is an electronic music genre from people of color in London. And it turns out that there was all this harassment and sort of tokenizing of people of color at the station. And if you're not unfamiliar with Radar Radio, it is the bougiest radio station I've ever been to. I've never seen a radio station this beautiful. It has like 8 studios and so much equipment. And the only reason why they have it is the guy who runs the station, his dad is the CEO of Sports Direct, which is a major brand in London they're a huge corporation. And I read the story in a statement put out by Pussy Palace, which were one of the radio shows that sort of were first to step away from Radar Radio. That was basically like they confronted the station about a harassment case, and then Sports Direct came in with their lawyers and basically made them sign like a non-disclosure agreement, and like you can't talk about this, and buried it, and nothing was done about it. And it's shitty when shitty people capitalize off of our hard work, and that's really what it's all about, why people are suspicious of brand involvement.
At the same time, though, I feel like when do I, like, in terms of like the coin, the money, there are very few opportunities for like artists of color to make that much capital.
And you got to.
You know what I mean? So I'm just like, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of like, it's an irrevocable kind of like
double-sided coin.
Yeah, exactly. So I just feel like just get the coin, get the coin, and then flip it into something that's actually like sincere and progressive. Like
100%. Like when you see certain artists team up with certain brands, like you might be like that's cringy, but also I don't blame you. Like
there was this. I had some friends in more feminist circles who were like really pissed off when I did a video with Pornhub, and like and like a music video, and I completely understood like why, but one of the things that I really had to tell them was, listen, like maybe to you my life seems like it's a certain way, but like you don't have any idea like how like being like Mykki Blanco with all the shit with my identity, HIV, this and that. You don't know how actually difficult it is for me to get like big budgets. Yeah. And sometimes. And when when someone presents a budget to you, you're just like, okay, well, how evil? And sometimes it is like, well, how evil are you? You know what I mean? It's just like, it is a thing. I don't know. It is a thing. It is a thing, And then, it's just hard.
It's also, there's something to be said about how often it's always, especially Black POC women, who are always the first to sort of eat the damages or deal with the fallout. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that the first people to sort of separate themselves from Radar Radio were all Black, like, Londoner, like, women. And I see this a lot where, like, in my own personal experience, sometimes people will message me and be like, oh, well, so-and-so that you're playing with on this lineup is problematic, or this person is not an ally, this person did this. And I'm like, do you want me to not eat? Because like...
Also, white people are not getting those messages. Like, it's like marginalized people are held to this like extra
standard. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Bambii we talk about this a lot, respectability politics.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Yeah. It's like the way I like navigate and who I choose to work with has a lens that I do not witness on my like white peers. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's also because like, you know, I like propagate a certain kind of politic, right? But it needs to be, you know, like reality needs to be considered, and the fact that I'm a real person who has to like navigate, who has to pay for shit. You know what I mean? So. Yeah, there's definitely a certain kind of accountability that POC that white people do not have because we hold people to a standard. Period.
You're good. You're good. Okay, we can get back to this in the Q&A, but I do want to wrap up the panel soon so that we can move on to the questions. But I want to end kind of hopefully on maybe a positive note. What's one thing that promoters, bookers, or artists can do to make their next event maybe more inclusive?
I might be biased, but partner up with a charity. I mean, that's the thing. I've been saying this repeatedly, and that's kind of why I'm here at the same time. But it does make a difference. And again, I think it puts the theory and the ideas and the conception into real action when you're supporting people who are doing frontline work and important work.
I would say two things. Really understand who you're booking. Really understand who you're booking. And then hire sub-promoters. Like, a lot of the times when I go on tour, I know the guy, and maybe it's a woman sometimes, but mostly I know the men that have booked me, like, are just like, oh, Mykki Blanco, this person will do a good show. Okay, click, we're gonna book him. But then it's like, you have to hire sub-promoters, because like me and my manager do this thing where it's like, no, don't just have Randy promote my show. Like, get like a queer person. I literally have this on my contract stuff. Like, you have to hire or get like a queer person to promote my show, because I just know that like it's not going to be promoted the way I know how my community works, and I know my show will be promoted a certain way like I want it. So I think a lot of people hire sub-promoters. If you're not familiar, or if you know someone that is going to be a big draw for your venue or your party or your club, but you don't know how to manage that show, have someone else do it, you know? But hire them.
I think that the desire for inclusivity is important, but it has to be sincere. Like, I feel like, you know, just like wanting a bunch of POC at your party just cause, when that doesn't reflect your real life, that doesn't reflect the communities you're involved in, that's weird, and that looks like fetishizing. Yeah. So I think that, like, at the same time, like, if I know a white girl and then she has white people at her parties, and then she comes from London, Ontario, I'm like, like, you know what I mean? Like, it can't just be aesthetic. It can't be aesthetic. It can't be superficial. So I think that inclusivity is good, but also like being sincere with the kind of communities you're tied to and speaking directly to them is also very important. And then not like co-opting like the aesthetic of other POC. Like, I'm not interested in that either. Like, also, you need to be throwing spaces that make sense for you. Like, I'm not like gonna go out of my way and go to a neighborhood I'm not from to be inclusive, because that's weird and not sincere, and I don't know anything about their lived experience. So I don't know, I think inclusivity is a bit more complex than that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cindy, the last word.
Yeah, so I'm gonna agree with both of you, but especially what Mykki said about hiring a sub-promoter. Going further, I think that it's better to have not just a diverse lineup, but a diverse organizational team, people in leadership positions. Because like, the thing is, I've had so many experiences. Like, when I went on tour in Europe, I played shows where I walked into the club and there was like 3 women there, and one of them was me, and had a terrible experience. You know, had racist comments heckled at me while I was DJing. It was in small town Germany, but like these things, like part of it is that my booking agent is a white male, and so he doesn't understand things that are a priority to me, and I don't want to have to explain it to him because it's awkward, because my other booking agent is a black woman, and it's a completely different vibe, different relationship, different, like, she just thinks about these things, but I can't expect that from him. So it's like, it has to come from top down. Like, I've played parties where the promoter has a safer space policy on his party event page, and then I get harassed by someone in the audience, and I ask them to eject them, and then they don't eject them, and they're like, oh, well, he said, actually, this and this happened. And I'm like, why are you questioning what I told you? I'm sober. This person is not, and you're going to take his word over mine. That sort of thing. It's like, that would be less of an issue if he had a woman who he was working with, or a queer person, or a person of color, or all three. I don't know. But it also becomes a problem if they're tokenizing, like, people, like, picking people that are like, I don't know you, because I've had messages from people that are like, oh, well, I'm putting out this record, I really want you to be on it because we have no women on it. And it's like, fuck you. Like, don't tell me that. Don't tell, like, I think men just need to be more aware of, like, how they are executing their intentions, because I feel like dudes are full of good intentions, but, like, they just have no idea, like, how it comes across to people. So.
But I just really quickly, I also think that one thing is that I feel like we don't realize how much power we actually have. Like if any of you guys end up being, like, you know, touring musicians or throwing your own parties, when you talk or you make these contracts with these venues and if you give them a good bar and all this shit, next time around you can make stipulations. Like, no, like, actually, like a woman needs to be working this job or this or that. You can actually demand these things, and, like, if they want to make money or do business with you, they should comply.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. And now we're going to open it up to the floor for some questions.
I think it's very important that you guys are pointing out how there's sort of this lower expectation for men and white people when they are doing their bookings. I really disagree with that idea. I think it's gross. And so I would just love to hear from you guys what steps people can sort of be taking so that we can sort of calibrate that bar and it's not so divisive.
I honestly think that part of why we expect that more is because of identity. That, like, as a person of color or a queer person, we're going to understand the challenges better, and people expect more out of us because it actually affects us, whereas it doesn't affect.
I also think white people do not link like, there's this thing where I am linked to the rest of my community irrevocably. Like, I am, you know what I mean? There's this, it's like, it's subconscious, it's psychological, right? And I don't hate it, right? But sometimes it can be, like, a burden to be, like, there's an extra kind of, like, I just have an accountability as a black woman to represent people who look like me that I don't think white people feel. I think you just can't understand how that feels. And I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. I don't think that's going to change. Like, there's no really answer to that. Like,
white people should call each other out more often.
Yeah, because white people like to listen to other white people. Yeah. They do. Because like a critique from a person of color feels emotional. You know what I mean? It feels like you're being sensitive. Or another white person, you kind of respect them more as your peer, and it can seem like a logical critique, and that's true.
Hi, everyone. I was just wondering, I know some people mentioned that, like, when they were writing contracts to do bookings and stuff, that, like, they had sort of stipulations about who would be in certain positions, but I was wondering if you've received backlash or venues have not, like, wanted to continue working with you or seen you as too difficult for trying to do things like that. So that's, I hope, is it confusing or, yeah.
No, I don't think it's confusing, because you know what has happened? It's like, this happened in Oakland, this happens in a few places. Like, it's a night of my show. Okay, the person who booked it knows who Mykki Blanco is, but a whole lot of people don't. And so a lot of the staff didn't. And they had this, like, asshole who was, like, really angry working. And it's like they knew this guy had issues with, like, LGBT people, right? And they had all these signs up, like, safe space, safe space. The asshole ends up going off on somebody. It was so predictable. And afterwards, you know, in the emails between the booking agents, blah, 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 they're like, oh, Mykki overreacted, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, well, if you knew this person, and this was the same night, as my show, then, like, why didn't you have someone else working that night. We had a situation in Atlanta, where in Atlanta of all places, where I guess the sound person that night didn't know it was going to be a hip hop show, and that's another thing. People treat you real differently when, and especially in America, when it's a band. Oh, they're willing, because that somehow that idea of a band fits into this lineage of what real music is. Yes. Oh, they're willing to do fucking backflips, okay, when it's a band. Oh, y'all have been on the road for so long, like all that shit. When it's a DJ and an MC, all of a sudden they like devalue us in this way. We're like, oh, you're just gonna get up stage and waka waka waka. And it's like, and so it's like we had this, and it's just like that's why I'll shut up. That's why I made that comment. Know who you're booking, and then stay aware. Like, don't be a loser. Like, stay aware of like your venue, and like on a certain night when it's going to be a certain show, your staff should reflect a more conducive environment to that artist.
I would say the venue thing, but I don't know if that's like slander, but recently I was having a meeting at the venue, and I was telling them the importance about genderless washrooms, and it was like a hard no, like, now look at all these fights. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck.
Who's fighting who?
And I think, and I just eventually just like said no. I'm like, we can't. I'm not going to do this event here. And I think that people are afraid to say no to institutions, but to me it's like, because I like so much believe in these communities that I know are going to come up for me anyways, like it's like actually your loss, you know what I mean, for you not to compromise. It's like they're going to be equal either way, you're right, like, but it's like if you're not smart enough as like a 45-year-old white male to maybe get that this is important, I'll just say no and I'll go somewhere else, and then some other white man who's 45 can make the money back. So there is definitely backlash, but it's like, don't be afraid to say no, because like there is another option. There is another option. Like there always is,
I definitely agree. I think backlash comes with the territory for what we do, but for what we lose, we gain so much more. That like when we say no to venues or certain promoters because of politics or whatever, how they treat people, that actually like we gain more of a sort of what's the word, like obsessive following, passionate following of people that are just, they never felt like their voice had someone to sort of push up or amplify. They never felt like anyone up there on the stage was after what they cared about. So like that kind of devotion is so much more than like some white dude will ever give me. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is I think that it's really important when you are not someone that looks like us that have a clause like that in your contract. I just remember one of my favorite artists in techno is this guy named Object, and when we booked him, his contract said that it had to be 50-50, like the whole bill. Like it had to be male versus like women, queer people. Although it is weird that women and queer people are always lumped into one, but like it's better than nothing. But I just remember thinking like, wow, I had never seen a white male say something like that, which is so much more powerful in that way because we hold them to a lower standard. But it's also just like, you got to deal with it. Like, yeah.
I wanted to add to like what you said, because I think that's like, it's weird, but it's also really problematic, because I think people forget that like within marginalized communities, there are other hierarchies that exist, and it's really weird to just like lump in queer people with women, with trans people, you know what I mean? Because we all actually have different levels of privilege and ways that we can actually reoppress each other. So I think we need to, there's major differences in those social locations, and people need to like really be aware of that. Like being
TERFs that want to keep trans people out.
Definitely, being a queer cis person is not like being a trans person. It's like you're not nearly as vulnerable, right? So I think people forget that a lot, and it's really problematic.
So we're talking about sort of like reminiscing about like the 90s party scene in Toronto, and talking about the importance of like DIY spaces and underground parties for these communities, and also to rise up, and how we don't want it just to all be clubs where you have to wear fancy shoes. So I just wondered what can be done or what is being done to protect these spaces in Toronto, because there's just a rampage against, codifying any full space and sort of, talking about how, partnering with brands can do things, but also, partnering with the government or partnering with people who are empowered to be able to protect historic venues or make new ones.
I'm really passionate about this topic, so I'm gonna run with it.
Go off. Go off.
I've put my party work in progress on hiatus because I've lost, our after hours spaces are they're definitely under attack by the city, by regulatory committees, by the AGCO, and things like that. And for a really long time that I was of the mentality, very rampant in DIY circles, which is that we just have to keep doing what we do, regardless of what the city wants, regardless of the rules, laws, things like that, not playing by the book, because fuck the book is violent. But I'm at my rope's end. Basically, I've been doing parties for 3 years, 2.5, and I'm burned out. I've lost thousands of dollars because of the lack of spaces. And I think the only way for me to move forward, I can't speak for other people, is that I have to change the laws. And we have to change the rules that are in place. And the thing is, I think people in DIY circles, in alternative spaces, we feel we're very woke, but we're very politically disempowered, in that we have a lot of views, we're very engaged, but yet at the same time, we have no idea how to make those things actually change. And when a promoter comes in and they want to do a party in this really cool space, and then the city's like, well, you can't do this and you can't do this, I'm shutting you down. All they're hearing is the old people that call up the office and complains about noise. Yeah. They never hear from us. We just talk to each other. We yell into the ether of Facebook, but nobody from the city is reading Facebook for our opinions. And so if we want to do something about the spaces, we need to organize, form a coalition of DIY promoters, and really, really elevate our voice so that there is someone representing us in these cases when there are meetings with the city, with people, the powers that be.
Toronto is a very difficult city. What I've done strategizing, it makes it a little easier because I have been working with nonprofits and I have a charitable status and the number. And so some of the ways, because over the years working with certain venues, it has been difficult because of their mentality, or maybe they're very for-profit and negotiating with them is hell. And so what I did with strategizing is just using maybe more non-traditional party spaces. So not bars, not clubs, whether they're galleries or industrial spaces. Again, I recognize that it is easier when you have a charitable status, but again, not to be overly repetitive, if you do partner with a nonprofit charity, then you can, and I've done that with, whether it was with Inside Out, whether it's with Rainbow Railroad, you can borrow that charity status and then get an SOP and use more creative spaces to
I have a question
events.
with that, though. If you're partnering with a charitable...
Not every charity might want to lend their status, but there are ones that will. Yes,
How are you also doing that, then also paying artists who are coming in and paying them their fee as well? Because that's my main concern is if I'm booking people from around the world, I also want to be able to, especially if it's artists of color. Especially if it's artists of color, I want to be able to pay them their fee. You know what I mean?
Fairly.
So
yeah,
I'm just asking if is that possible in that context?
It is a priority for me to pay artists fairly. And when you're in a non-traditional space and you have your own SOP, it also allows you to work with certain sponsors, like Absolut, for product, and then you could make larger revenues on in alcohol. So that raises your budget, your revenue, and then you could also in turn pay your artists more fairly. It's a lot more work, it's not easy, but when you do put in that time and energy to pick the right space, to pick the right artist, to pick the right staff, and you had, it's been said repeatedly on this panel, it is top-down and lateral. You have to work with the right people who have the same intentions and wants and desires and putting it into action versus, because you could have everything all planned, and then you end up hiring a security. You know, like some places you do have to hire either their security or whatnot. But you have to have those difficult conversations where all staff, all volunteers on board know what your goal is, and to have that safer space and welcoming space. Like I said, it's not necessarily easy. It's a lot of hours, but in the end, it is worth, you know, having that different type of feel and energy and being in a more unique space than a regular bar or club or venue.
I mean,
and you can work with more artists. You can work with installation artists and just really create the space.
To answer to that, I've been throwing parties in the city for years, and I never had access to Absolut, to corporate backing, to sponsorship until now.
Yeah.
Like,
you have to be doing it for a minute.
The thing is, DIY exists on the backs of nameless nobodies who are just passionate about this world, this music, who don't have, you know, access to brands and all of these things. And like, you know, part of what we do is making it more accessible to people like that. But I just think, like, I don't know how anyone could possibly make money, make a living in the city throwing parties if we're also got to pay, like, the artists, got to run the event, make the event affordable while also donating to charity, doing all of this stuff. It's like, how? Like,
I think collaboration is incredibly important to kind of widen the market and the outreach. You know, Rainbow Railroad and Inside Out previously, the previous organization I worked for, they all started as small DIY collectives, very, very tiny, and over many years, they were volunteer run. Rainbow Railroad started in 2006 with a small group of people, went to World Pride in Tel Aviv. They met a young Palestinian queer youth that lived on the street, and that moment sparked this collective to create and found Rainbow Railroad. And, you know, that was 2006. We only became a charitable organization in 2014. So we were dependent on people who wanted to volunteer their time and energy and their skills, and leveraging those various skills to help build the organization and what it is. And right now, Rainbow Railroad is going through an incredible change. In 2014 charitable status, 2016, I believe, hired their first staff member, and then 2017, you know, we had a goal of, we created a strategic plan for 3 years. So in 2019 was to bring, I think it was 170 individuals. But in 1 year, in 2017, we actually blew that out of the water. We ended up helping 200 people. And it was based on people like yourself, like people, the community. It was on the backs of the community reaching out to us. Right now, there's endless numbers of requests in our inbox wanting to support us, wanting to give us money, donate money to us, and throw parties on our behalf. And it's incredible. The generosity is incredible. So it is out there, but it does take a lot of work and many years. But I think Toronto, we're in this really great place where there are just as many people wanting to do good and put that out there. And then also there's all those challenges and barriers as well. But I think of all the cities in the world, the fact that we're having this panel, that you are here in this room, and you know, Absolut is presenting this event, that we're in a very good position.
So that wraps up our panel. Thank you so much for coming.